I'm a junior in college, and it's taken me 2 years to be able to talk about what happened to me freshman year. I go to school at a well-known college on the East Coast. I don't want to say which one, but it's an old school in an old city. All freshmen are required to live on campus in the dorms at this college. I guess they figured it's a good way to get young people to be more independent and to get to know other freshmen. My flight home for the holidays was late, well after most of my dorm mates had left for break. I was the only person on my floor at that point and was glad to be going home the next morning. I was mostly packed and was just finishing up some last-minute stuff before bed. I went down the hall to take a shower in the shared bathroom. The bathroom was about 30 feet down the hallway. Next to the bathroom and showers was the group common area, which had couches and chairs, a big fireplace, a really big TV, and some printers. There was even a microwave for warming up crappy college dorm food. I had my shower stuff and my towel and clothes, and I was just passing the common area room when I saw a shadow move at the back of the room. Because most of the students had already left for the holiday, the common room was dark with just enough light from the hallway to see a few feet into the room. I stopped for a second, looked into the room, and it took a second for my eyes to adjust from the bright hallway light. I turned on the light. Nobody. There was nobody there. It was empty. I turned around, turned off the lights, and went into the shower room thinking, I'm losing it. My mind was playing tricks on me because I was alone. When I was done, I headed back down the hallway, and as I passed the common room, I heard a printer kick on. I jumped. I looked in the common room at the printers and saw 2 pages being fed through. Then the printer fell silent. A part of me wanted to walk over and see why the printer had started up, but another part of me was pretty freaked out, and I just wanted to go back to my room and lock the door. It was an old school, and there were always rumors of ghosts in the dorms, but I didn't believe in any of that stuff. And now here I was getting spooked over nothing. Since most people had gone home and were all pretty energy conscious, the far end of the hallway was dark, while the elevators, the common room, the bathrooms, the areas I was using, they were still lit up. And this definitely didn't help with the spooky vibes. I was almost to my door when I heard the printer again. I stopped dead in my tracks. Damn. Now I have to go look. There's no one else on my floor, so there shouldn't be anybody using our printers. I threw my wet towel over my shoulder and made my way back to the common room. I turned the lights back on and crossed the empty room. The printer at the far corner of the room had 3 pieces of paper on its tray. I picked up the papers, and my breath caught in my throat. On each paper, there was a single word. I'm still here. A cold chill ran down my spine. Was this somebody pranking me? Was there somebody still left on my floor? Only people on this floor should have access to those printers. I was really freaked out. I dropped the papers, turned, and started running towards the door to the hallway across the common room. As I reached the doorway, I looked down the empty hallway towards my room and started bolting towards my door. Suddenly, the lights closest to the darker end of the hallway shut off. Then the lights that I was walking through shut off, and as I reached my door, the lights in front of my door shut off. Now the hallway was pitch black as I slammed the door closed. I locked the door and stepped back, staring at the door. I didn't know what had happened. It had all happened so fast. I was just trying to catch my breath. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, and then I heard scratching sounds outside my door, high-pitched, on the door, and on the walls next to my door. No footsteps or voices, just scratching. I called campus security, and as I was on the phone, the scratching stopped. I waited for what felt like an hour before I heard footsteps coming down the hallway and then a knock on my door. It was campus security. The guard told me that if there had been somebody there, they were gone now. He told me that I should keep the lights on in the hallway even after I told him that I hadn't turned them off. I asked him to go to the common room with me to see the creepy printer sheets. We walked down the hallway together, went into the common room, walked to the far end of the room of the printer, and the papers were gone. I know I had dropped them right there. The guard must have thought I was making it all up. He told me to lock my door, keep the lights on in the hallway, and he left. About 2 hours later, I was getting ready to get into bed, for my early flight, and I started hearing scratching right on my door again. It got louder and softer over the next few hours, and I was glad for the big metal door between me and that hallway. I kept the lights on all night and just stayed up. Me and that horrifying scratching for hours. When it was close to time for me to call an Uber, I called campus security again and asked them to escort me downstairs. When he arrived and announced himself, I opened the door, and he looked pretty serious. He pointed to the outside of my door. "We're going to have to make a damage report about that." I looked down and saw what must have been hundreds of deep scratches in the paint on the door and on the wall next to the door. He probably thought I had made them. I didn't say a word. I grabbed my stuff, thankful not to be alone and to be getting the hell out of there. I made my flight home and was happy to get out of that old building. Over break, I called my roommate and told her what had happened. She was all into paranormal stuff and she got really excited. "Seriously? I heard a story about a girl that disappeared on the campus decades ago. She tried to sneak into her boyfriend's dorm, but since it was all-male dorm, she wasn't allowed. She had the idea of climbing down the chimney and got stuck. The farther down she went, the harder she got stuck. She tried clawing her way out, but eventually suffocated in that chimney." I had to go back to that dorm after break, and I made a point of never being alone. To this day, I wonder if the freshmen assigned to that dorm hear that poor girl who's still there. My family owned some land near Roxbury, Vermont, that we'd visit in the summers. It was a big plot, about 60 acres, and mostly wooded. There was a small cabin, just comfortable enough to spend a few weeks in the summers, and then head back to Connecticut where we were living. I remember how fun it was to be a kid exploring the woods with my older brother, Chris. Our parents always warned us to stay clear of the northern edge of the property, though. They said there were caves out there, and we might run into a bear if we got too close. I remember the day my mom warned us off that side of the land. She got really serious and looked at my dad, who looked at her and then away. It was weird. I had no idea why. I was just a kid. I guess they thought the bear warning was enough to scare us off, and they dropped it after that. Of course, it had the opposite effect. What 12 and 14-year-olds don't want to see a bear? Seeing wild animals was the highlight of summer cabin trips for us, so we'd sneak off towards the northern end of the property for these caves, but never found one. One year, on a summer morning, we headed out for a family hike. As we headed towards the tree line, we found a trail of dead grass. It looked singed or burned, dark and brittle, as though someone had burned a path from the north side tree line to the center of the small clearing next to the cabin. It was about 3 feet wide and stood in sharp contrast with the lush green summer grass just beyond its edges. We silently looked down at this dead patch of earth and also noticed the woods were silent too. There were no birds or bugs making any noises. My brother and I were the first to break the spell, stepping towards the weird burned grass. "No!" my mom said loudly, breaking the silence. My parents looked at each other and rushed us inside. They told us not to go outside, and we'd hike tomorrow instead. We were bummed, but honestly more freaked out by the way our parents were acting. They weren't people that were scared of natural things, but whatever this was didn't seem natural. We stayed inside that day and watched movies instead. It had been a beautiful day, but my mom closed all the curtains and told us to stay inside. I remember talking to Chris later that day, and he brushed me off, saying our parents were just being careful and not to worry. But I couldn't help noticing his voice was a little shaky too. After that day, he didn't want to go searching for bears anymore. My parents took us to Vermont less after that summer, and when we would go, they'd keep us close to the cabin. "No wandering off," they'd say. Fast forward to now. My brother and I are adults, and our parents have passed away. My dad passed 3 years ago, and my mom 2 months ago. When we settled the accounts, we found that she'd left us the Vermont cabin to share, but had also added an odd note. Avoid the north end of the property. We hadn't been to that cabin in years, As my parents had gotten older, they couldn't really hike anymore, and Chris had family and kids that kept him busy. I was tied up with work and figured the cabin was probably in rough shape after years of neglect and so many harsh winters. Chris and I planned to go up together before winter, but time was running out and he couldn't get away. I decided to go up on my own and check and winterize the old cabin before it snowed. Hopefully, it wasn't too bad. I planned on being there for a long weekend and brought a tent to stay in just in case the cabin was unlivable. I took the 3-hour drive north on Route 91 and it was just getting dark when I got there. Of course, the cabin was dark and quiet, and as I approached from my car, all I could hear was the sounds of the crunching leaves under my feet. That was odd. Usually you'd hear crickets this time of year. I brushed the thought off as I headed towards the door. I opened the cabin door and clicked on the lights. So many memories came rushing into my mind. The summers we spent there, the good times we had. And then I remembered that weird day we found the burnt path near the cabin. I was happy to brush that thought away, though, too. As I scanned the cabin, I could see mouse poop and some spider webs, which is pretty normal for empty spaces, especially in cold climates. But the cabin was dry, the roof was still holding, and it was otherwise clean. I brought in my bag, my laptop, and some food supplies for the weekend. I also brought a game cam so I could see what was living around the cabin. Bears are more active in the fall just before hibernation, so I was hoping to catch a glimpse of one while I was out there. I set up the camera facing the north tree line before it got too dark, started a fire in the small wood stove, and swept out the mouse poop. I made myself a cold-cut sandwich and set up my sleeping bag on the old couch. I watched the fire die as I fell asleep. I woke up late the next morning and made some coffee. I cleaned more of the cabin and eventually sat down for a late lunch. I looked at my phone. 3:25 p.m. I made myself another cup of coffee and opened the front door to get some fresh air in the cabin. I flipped on my laptop and tapped into the game cam feed to see if any motion had triggered it last night. There were 2 notifications of activity. I clicked on the first notification. 11:20 p.m. I watched in horror as I saw a figure in a black cape glide from the tree line to the clearing next to the cabin. The figure was tall and skinny, and the cape was long and shredded, dragging on the floor behind it. It stopped directly in front of the camera about 10 feet away and didn't move. Even though the footage was black and white, the darkness of that figure seemed to suck out all the light in the video. It was like a black hole in the middle of the screen. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I could see in the hood was darkness. It was terrifying. I watched this figure continue to stand dead still until the game cam timed out due to inactivity. It never moved. With a shaking hand, I clicked on the second activity notification. 6:20 a.m. As I watched, my heart went cold. The figure turned and glided back into the dense wood line. I quickly clicked on the dead space between the 2 notifications and sped up the footage. From 11:20 p.m. to 6:20 a.m., this figure stood stock still, facing the cabin, for 7 hours. The only movement in that dead space was the grotesque twitching of the trees in the sped-up footage and the shadows moving as the night's darkness faded. That thing was standing just feet away from me for hours while I slept. I sat frozen, staring at that laptop, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I had shivers running up and down my arms, and I felt myself starting to panic. I closed the laptop. The reality of what I had just seen didn't make any sense. I knew I had to go look. As I looked up at the open cabin door, I realized it was silent. No birds, no sounds. I wanted to run over and slam it shut, but I knew I had to go look. I stepped out the door and made my way towards the space in the clearing where the figure had been standing. My stomach lurched. There was a burn mark in the dead leaves. From the tree line to the place where the figure had stood, the leaves were black, the ground beneath charred. The memory of that summer we saw the charred path came screaming back into my head as I ran inside. What the hell was that thing? What did it want? Did my parents know about it? I grabbed my stuff and got the hell out of there. I grabbed my phone and saw a text from Chris. "Hey, I'm headed up to the cabin. I should be there by 11 tonight. See you then." I tried calling my brother, but it went straight to voicemail. I kept calling, but still, only voicemail. My phone was almost dead. Now I had to drive back up this dark, wooded road to the cabin and wait.